All right, so as promised, we're going to go ahead get into the meat of our program here. We're going to be talking tonight about how to prepare for your fantasy football draft. So we're kind of taking this from an angle of, people who kind of casual players, or maybe you're playing for the first time, or, maybe you played for a few years, but you haven't been doing so well, and you're kind of hoping for some things we can provide to you to help do better in your fantasy draft this season. So we're going to discuss how to prepare for your draft, and then we're going to be discussing, some of the advantages you can get during your draft, some of the things that we recommend, things that we do during our drafts to kind of help push you along and kind of take you to that new level. So Jay, when you are thinking about, just having a conversation with somebody who might be doing fantasy for the first time or a casual player, what would you say is the number one thing they should look at first and foremost when preparing for a fantasy football draft?
Well, first of all, you got to know your scoring system. If you don't, you got to know, was it PPR, non-PPR? What's your defensive scoring? Like the league we're in this year, we fixed it so that the defensive scoring, a score against the defense only counts if the offense scores against the defense. If the other team's defense gets a pick and returns it for a touchdown, it does not count against your defense. But you got to know that kind of stuff. You got to know, is it 4 or 6 point passing touchdowns? The certain positions get bonuses. The running backs or wide receivers get bonuses for, catching a 50-yard pass for a touchdown. Is it a 2-quarterback league? That's going to affect your draft strategy immensely. Quarterbacks are going to go way earlier.
Big time.
And you're going to need to get at least one really good one. What are the must starts each position? How many flex plays do you have? Is there an IR spot? How many bench spots do you have? All of these things go into, your strategy going into your draft. If you don't know this stuff, you can't do anything. You're screwed. You're going into it blind. It's like, going into a whorehouse with a blindfold on. You don't know what you're going to get.
Stuff, and again, preparing for the draft is important. And continuing with that, want to talk a little bit about encouraging leagues for where they're actually drafting the positions, meaning who's drafting first, who's drafting second, who's drafting 10th. This is all very important stuff, and in our league, we like to do fun games based on it. We like to bet on, maybe a PGA Tour or maybe a NASCAR race and just arbitrarily pick positions. Instead of it just having reverse order of who got last year gets first pick this year. So we want to be a little bit creative with this. And again, this is important to do ahead of time, at least a month in advance, so that you can actually take the time to do it. Because unless you're us, where you can literally look at fantasy football every day, chances are you're probably going to look at it once or twice a week during the off season. And this is a good time for you to know, hey, this is where I'm drafting, and here's kind of some targets I want. Here's who I think might fall to that position, and here's who I might want to reach for that position. We'll get a little more into the draft here in a second. But Rob, we'll turn it back over to you if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, so just an example of something we did this year for the first time in our Red Zone Warriors League is that we chose to use the NFL draft itself as a way to to pick our draft position. So it made it fun. It was, we're all excited about the NFL starting. The draft is kind of what precipitates all this stuff. So we actually, picked draft namees out of a hat, like the top 10 guys. And then we got to, select which guy that we wanted, kind of guessing at where he would actually go in the draft. And then when the draft was over, in whatever order those guys actually went is the order in which we got to choose which draft slot that we prefer and want. And we did that. We've already nailed that down. Of course, the draft is, months over with now. But we went ahead and selected our spot a couple weeks ago, so we have plenty of time to prepare. And that's the point here. If you guys are picking your guys or you're getting your draft slots, the day of the draft or a few minutes before or a week before, it just doesn't give you much time to prepare. And if you're one of the guys who puts more effort into your league, it's only going to give you a competitive advantage to know your spot ahead of time. And we'll get more into that, the reasons why that's beneficial moving forward here. Another thing I would add to this, in addition to, again, knowing your scoring system inside and out, finding out your draft position as soon as possible prior to your draft, is, create your own rankings. If you're really into fantasy, this is something I really highly recommend. You will learn a ton from this. And if you have a little extra time, it doesn't take all that much time, but go ahead and create your own rankings and then tier them out. You'll hear us talking about tiering here quite a bit. One of the things you can do is you can just start by you got to have a baseline somewhere. It'd be too hard to start from scratch. So go ahead and use last year's final point standings as your baseline. There's plenty of sites that you can download this stuff and get it into an Excel document or whatnot. And then you start to move the guys up and down based on a variety of things, such as if guys change teams, coaching changes is pretty significant in how their offense is going to be run. Free agents that were added to certain teams or guys that moved around. Where did the high drafted rookies get added to what teams and how that's going to affect the current skill players in those positions on those teams. You look at players who got a really high workload last year. And some of the guys who you think are going to break out, some of those second-year receivers and, second-year running backs that you think are going to, have another year of development under their belt and really break out like an Andre Ellington possibly for this year. You can look at strength of schedule to some extent as maybe a possible tiebreaker before a couple guys if you're not sure who to rank higher. It's something fun. We've been doing this for years. We enjoy doing that. If you're not that into it or you just frankly don't have the time to do it, then obviously you can go to redzonewarriors.com. You can look at our rankings. But the bottom line is, preparation is the key for heading into your draft. You have to be prepared and feel prepared so you make good decisions. So if you feel comfortable using someone else's rankings, then go ahead and do that. And there's some other options here for you as well. We'll go ahead and plug some of these other guys that have been doing this for a long time. Fantasy Football Guys is, of course, a great site for that. Fantasy Guru, 444 with John Polson, Fantasy Pros, Gridiron Experts, the Draft Sharks. There's just a variety, a couple half dozen sites there that you guys can check out. And if you don't want to use their rankings, you can still look at some of their sleeper lists and so forth, and just kind of get yourself prepared, for going into your draft. So Jay, anything else that you want to add to how to prepare for your draft?
Yeah, you got a mock draft. Like the Jimmer was saying earlier, find out your draft position early, and one of the main reasons to do this is so that you can go on, one of these sites like Fantasy Football Calculator or Draft Experts, whatnot, and mock draft. And if you know your position, it saves you a lot of time, because if you don't know your position, what you have to do is you've got to do multiple mock drafts from the beginning of the draft, the middle of the draft, the end of the draft, from all different positions to try to figure out what strategy is going to work best for you to get the guys that you want. So you're looking at, do I got to do running back heavy at the beginning, or wide receiver heavy, or tight end early? Do I want to get a quarterback stud in the early rounds, which, by the way, you should never, ever, ever, ever do? Or do I want to do it, late quarterback streaming, or, take a guy like Stafford in the 5th or 6th round? Or do you want to do best player available, which is usually what I do, or a combination of all these things? Your draft spot, like I said, it's going to dictate a lot of your strategy to you. So the earlier you find out, the more mocks you can do. I mean, I literally do, and much to my wife's dismay, hundreds of these things every off season, because I want to know exactly what's going to go on. When I walk into the draft, I want to be like, okay, here's the guys I'm going to get, most likely. I mean, weird things can happen to anybody, but I want to know as much as I can about what's going to go down and who's going to be available and who's not going to be available. So, and you can look at things like, possible areas where guys make runs on certain positions and stuff like that. So some of the sites you can go to for it: Fantasy Football Calculator, My Fantasy League does them, ESPN does them, Yahoo, CBS, NFL.com. They all have mock draft sites. Another tool I like to use for mock drafting, because I'm in a keeper league, is Fantasy Pros has a draft wizard. And what they do is you're not actually drafting against other people online. You're drafting against expert picks and ADP and whatnot. They have an algorithm, but you can put keepers in. There's a lot you can do. I use that a lot in my keeper league so that I don't have to go into a mock draft and be like, well, I can't get Calvin Johnson because he's being kept, and have to pick somebody else. And it just doesn't work right for you to see what's really going to happen. So definitely use that. It's a great tool if you have a keeper league. So, Jim, you got anything else you want to add to this here?
Yeah, some final thoughts before we talk about, during the draft. This is a good time. I mean, usually the leagues a lot of people are in, especially as neighborhood leagues or friend leagues, go have a couple extra beers with your buddy and maybe have a few more glasses of water and pick their brains, see what they're looking for. If you can find out someone they're really high on and someone that they'll reach for, then you can either slip back and maybe be able to get someone that will be available to you there. So you kind of can actually formulate a lot of your opinion from them. Again, it's also speculation too, because a lot of times guys will say anything they want to say just to throw you off. Mostly like, oh, hey, I'm taking a kicker in the third. I'm not always going to buy that. Sometimes it happens though. You'd be surprised.
All right, on our next show, we're going to be breaking down the major training camp headlines and position battles in the AFC. So join us in 2 weeks for that. In the meantime, go to Red Zone Warriors, where you can watch previous episodes, see our rankings, and subscribe to and rate the show via iTunes. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter and tweet us all your fantasy football questions at Red Zone Warriors. So for the Cushman and the Jimmer, I am Rob the Commish Smith, and remember, if you are taking a fantasy off season, you are already losing. And we'll catch you next time.